Okay, I'm here on Squam Lake in Holderness, New Hampshire. This is a filming location I've wanted to do for quite some time, and it's actually one of the least intensive as far as finding the number of locations go, because it basically depended upon one primary location. Nearly the entire movie was shot on one spot, and the movie that I'm referring to is on Golden Pond. And I was just always captivated by the beauty of the scenery and the setting and the surroundings of that particular cabin that they used in this movie. And if you've seen On Golden Pond, which many of you likely have if you're watching this video, you know that there's only a few locations outside of the actual the cabin itself that are shown. And this video was going to be made or broken based off the fact of me being able to identify where that cabin was. Now, I knew it was going to be on private property, which it is. I was able to identify where it was located, but the best way to try to be able to see it without trespassing was to do it by water. And I rented a kayak, as you see here, and paddled my way here. So it took me roughly, I would say a little over an hour to get here, and it's going to take me quite a while longer to get back because it is a windy day, and I'm going to go into that wind that helped bring me over here. So but it's beautiful here. As you can see off in the distance, there's mountains. You can see over here there's islands that are out here, just like you see in the movie is what it looks like here in real life. Just absolutely beautiful. Let's go ahead and get started. I hope you enjoy this, and here's the filming locations for On Golden Pond. Now, this piece of property directly here in front of me, it sort of shoots out into the water here, because if you look to the left, the land that's over there is kind of set back, and then right about here it starts to project outward, and then it does here, and then it starts to go back into like a cove. So the part of the piece of property I'm talking about is right in here. But this is where the cabin for On Golden Pond is located. And as a matter of fact, if you look right through the trees right there, you can kind of see the sunlight hitting the roof. It is right inside there. Now, I'm going to paddle up and give you some better views, but I did want to sit back here and kind of show you the lay of the land and how things are set up from right here, as it's a pretty good vantage point. Now, all the locations with the boat, all of the boat stuff would have been right over here. You see this pine tree that's right here? Just to the right of that is a little bit of a cove to get access to the cabin from the water. That is where the boat dock would have been during filming. That is where Norman and Ethel would have had their boats, their canoe, their little small engine boat, and then of course the Thayer would have all been docked right over here. Right here in the trees was where the gazebo would have been. Now, the gazebo is currently over here. It's still on the same piece of property, but they moved it for the movie. So it was over here, and they moved it here for filming, and moved it back from this location over to there. And I'll show you all of that when I get up here closer to the island, or not island, closer here to the peninsula. It's more like a peninsula. I'll show you where it currently sits and where they moved it to best I can, but I have to kind of do it in stages because, as I said, in a kayak here, so I need to paddle and try to do it as I float along. Now, as I come up here alongside of this little point here, the gazebo would have been right here during filming. So right up here is where it would have been nestled. You can see there's a rock right here, and these prominent trees that are right here, and right there is where the gazebo would have been situated.
Charles, brought your sweater and your shoes and your car's out front.
You can actually see there's still a clearing that's right there that would have made it visible if it sat there, but it was right here on this little point. And then as you see over here, the shoreline kind of tucks in over here, and it's the very recognizable rocks that are right here. This one in particular. And that one, just to the side of it. And then right over here is where the docks would have been connected. So at one point there was like a main dock that came out here. and another one that projected out.
Hi, how are you?
And then this is where, you know, the boats would have been situated when they had the Thayer, and they had a small little motorboat, and then they even had a canoe that was up on there at one point, but that all would have been right here. So they would have come to, you know, it would come and go right here from this particular vantage point. And then of course you can start to see how the cabin kind of comes into frame right here. Again, the gazebo would have been right over here. And then here you have the cabin.
Hi, Charlie. Come on up and have some coffee. You can take 5 minutes.
Yeah, the rest is just bills and junk
Sure,
like that.
go on in.
I don't think you should do that in front of Chelsea's companion.
Now, looking at the exterior of the cottage from the water, one of the things that jumped out at me right away as I sort of honed in on specific parts of the cottage was the cottage doors. If you remember in the movie, when Norman opens that cottage door shortly after they arrive, the one cottage door just falls, like the hinges are bad, and it just kind of falls right onto the porch. And one of the things that you notice, and here I put it inside this red circle, are there's 2 handles of that cottage door that sort of make like almost like a half circle. So there's like a quarter of a circle on one door and a quarter of a circle on the other, and it almost has the looks of like a boat steering wheel, you know, like the upper half of a boat steering wheel. And those are very visible in that scene. And when you look at the exterior of the cottage and you look at those doors, right there they are. I mean, they're still there. You're talking, you know, 1981 when this was filmed, and I'm here in 2026, and you can see that those screen doors still have the same doors with those same handles, just as you see in filming. And it's just really cool to think that you had, you know, Henry Fonda, Jane Fonda, Katharine Hepburn, some of those actors right here at this location, this cabin, just as it appeared during filming. Now, right about here, where I'm floating in the kayak, is where the scene of Chelsea and Ethel, when they were skinny dipping, would have been shot from.
Remember when I was 9 years old and I came down and caught you and Norman skinny dipping?
No, I don't remember.
Oh, don't you remember I had that big light and I shone it on Norman on the diving board and he was all naked?
So they filmed that back up towards the land. So it's a really cool night shot, in my opinion, because you got the cottage that was lit up in the background, and you know, the dock and the rocks and everything were visible in that scene as well. But that shows just the 2 of them out here in the water, just a little bit of ways off the dock for that particular night shot with them, you know, having a conversation. So they would have shot that from roughly right here. Now, the area that the dock was in looks almost identical to what it did during filming, and in these big rocks over here are sort of like a focal point of where that dock was.
Morning, Ethel.
The dock sort of went parallel to them, so it was slightly off-centered. If you were standing on the land and looking straight out, it would have sort of gone a little bit to the left, kind of alongside of these rocks. And out beyond that, not quite a straight line off of that dock, but just slightly to the left is where the dive platform would have been, that little floating platform that had the diving board on it. And you can see here in present day, the swim deck looks further out than it did during filming, and a little more off to the left than it was during production. Now, as I come up onto the shoreline here, right here is the gazebo that was used in filming. So that is the actual gazebo that was used in the movie On Golden Pond.
Brought your sweater and your shoes and your cars out front.
And it's really interesting because, you know, when you see it in the movies, these columns here, the pillars or whatever you want to call them, that hold the roof up, you can tell that they're made out of, you know, like logs, and clearly it's all still like that.
I think it would be all right. Don't you know,
Good God! Can you be careful?
But that is the gazebo for On Golden Pond. Now, when you're on the cottage going out to that point where the gazebo would have been, this is the path that would have led to it. You can clearly see there's still a defined path here. You can clearly see there's still a defined path that leads to where the gazebo was. The gazebo sat on some rocks, and the rocks were a lot more prominent during filming than they are now. Now, this area is definitely still very rocky. My kayak actually got hung up on some of the rocks when I was coming up along the shoreline. So you're very much on top of them, and in the shallow water here where they are sort of like a projectile coming out of the water, but not like it was during filming. And it kind of leads me to believe, especially where the gazebo was, that those were brought over or added to this particular area, because if you look closely, you can see how that gazebo was sort of planted on them. Some of the legs of the gazebo were kind of planted into that rockiness, you know, the rocks that were there, and they're not really there in present day.
Life marches by, Chels. I suggest you get on with it.
Okay, I'm here in Holderness, New Hampshire. And this location right here in front of me is where Norman and Ethel would have pulled the boat up to get gas. So they would have come right underneath the bridge that I'm standing on. So if I show you, here's the rail. So the camera sort of follows them going underneath the bridge I'm standing on, and they go right over here and park right there. Now you can see there's a gas pump here, there's a gas pump there. In the movie, there was a third one right there, but the Thayers pulled their boat up right there, and that's where they refuel. And I came down here onto this dock just to show you where they would have shot that scene, and right here is where the Thayers would have parked their boat, right along this dock right here. And right here is the gas pump location. Now obviously it's a newer pump than what was used in filming, but this is the exact location of where the one was used in filming. It was just an older pump. And then if you look over here on this building, you can see the doorway right there. That's where Ethel ran in to get what she needed out of the store. But right here's where Norman would have been waiting while the two guys refueled his boat.
Come with me if you want to.
No, thank you very much.
Okay. Hello, Sumner.
Good morning, Mrs. Thayer.
Will you fill her up, please?
Sure.
Norman will help you.
Now you see this location twice. You see it the first time when the Thayers are refueling their boat, and you see it a second time later in the movie when Ethel is racing down here. She parks on this bridge that I'm standing on. She parks right here, and when she parks her car, you can actually see this railing right here over the bridge. you can see that as she runs down into that building there to get Charlie. Charlie was working on his boat and she needed his help to go out onto the lake to find Norman and Billy.
Oh, Charlie, thank God you're here. Come on, going for a ride. Huh? Norman and the kid are out on the lake. They should have been home hours ago. Hurry up.
Now, the movie on Golden Pond inspired this restaurant here in Holderness to name their restaurant after the fish on Golden Pond, and that fish's name was Walter's.
Good God! It's Walter! What the hell you doing here, you son of a bitch?
So you can see this restaurant is called Walter's Basin right here in Holderness. I thought that was interesting, and I had read about that before, but interesting name for your restaurant and inspired by the movie.
Oh, we call Walter! Caught Walter, the son of a bitch!
Now, this body of water you see out here in front of me is Lake Winnipesaukee. And this would have actually been the lake that they used for the scene where Billy takes the Thayer 4 out onto the lake by himself and is having a blast driving the boat around on his own. So they didn't do that on Squam Lake. They actually did that on Lake Winnipesaukee. It sits essentially adjacent to Squam Lake. It's a larger lake, so I think maybe they just had more open space to, you know, shoot that scene. They were using a helicopter to get the aerials, but they did not do that particular scene on Squam Lake. It was actually shot here. And then Purgatory Cove would have been filmed back over at Squam Lake, as it's known for having a lot of its rugged, rocky coves all around the lake.
All right,
Okay.
there we go.
Charlie! There they are, Charlie! Oh, my God.
Now, some of you may have noticed during my video that it appears I pulled my kayak up onto the ground and was taking some images from the actual property, and that is indeed true. But I was given permission to do so, and this is sort of a cool little tidbit to add to this, because when I first got there, I was just circling around the property, just getting everything I could from, you know, video and pictures and things from my kayak on the water. And I could kind of tell it looked like someone was probably staying at the cottage, but nobody had come out or anything. But after I was done pretty much doing what I wanted to do from my standpoint as far as shooting goes, somebody eventually did come out, and he and I struck up a conversation, and turns out he is actually a family member of the people that own the cottage, and they actually owned it all the way back during production of the movie. So they owned this back in the early 80s. So I thought that was extremely interesting. Of course, that piqued my interest with things, and then he and I conversed for probably a good 20 minutes on things about the movie and the cottage and production and all that. And for me, that stuff is almost as exciting to hear and talk about as it is for me to actually film and see these locations, because I love hearing the backstories and the insight. So at one point I asked him, hey, do you mind if I pull my kayak up onto the ground and just take some pictures so I'm not bobbing around out here as much? And he said, sure. Now, I was desperately hoping he was going to ask me, hey, do you want to see inside of it? But he did not. And you know what? I really, really wanted to ask him if he would mind if I took a look, but I just didn't feel comfortable in the moment. And I know the worst he could say is no, but sometimes I'm just, you know, I just don't want to overstep my welcome or my boundary when I'm doing these locations like this. Sometimes people do offer that stuff, and of course I jump at the opportunity. And had he asked me if I wanted to see it, I would have absolutely said yes. But you know, he was there. It wasn't just him. He was there with family members. There was a group of them, a number of them. And you know, here comes this guy on a kayak in a lake, and you know, coming into your cottage. Hey, do you mind if you get out of the way so I can get a shot here? I mean, I just didn't want to do it. So had he asked, oh yeah, I would have absolutely jumped at the opportunity. But one thing he did share with me about the interior of the cottage was it's pretty simple. It's somewhat, I don't want to say, like, he didn't necessarily say bare bones, but he kind of said it's like a simple, basic look. And he said what you see in the movie is what it still looks like today. And I actually found that really refreshing. So, you know, the actual cottage, the setting and everything is just absolutely beautiful. But, you know, kind of what you see in the interior of it back then is what he says it looks like now. So it's still retained that sort of modest, simple theme and look throughout. But it was really cool to see the property, and it was very cool to hear the stories about some of the things tied into the production that went on here.
Just the two of them now. The baby's all grown up and moved to Los Angeles or somewhere.